Camilla still remembers the way Emily stood there, arms crossed, chin lifted, with that familiar blend of entitlement and contempt, a look that had followed Camilla since childhood, but had never cut quite this deeply. It wasn't the words alone that shattered the air. It was the pleasure behind them. "If you can't handle me spending weekends with your husband," Emily said slowly, savoring every syllable, "then go to hell." No one shouted, no one gasped, no one even blinked. Ryan kept chopping vegetables with the same relaxed rhythm, like he'd heard it all before, like it didn't violate the most basic laws of loyalty. A strange silence wrapped around Camilla's ribs, not painful, not sharp, just final. She waited for something, anything from him. A glance, a wince, a sign that he saw the cruelty for what it was. Instead, he kept smiling down at the cutting board as if Emily were doing nothing more than sharing a harmless joke. Camilla's pulse slowed. Her breath steadied. Something inside her didn't break, it slipped free. Emily smirked as she turned away. "I'm not responsible for your insecurities," she added, her voice a casual blade. Those weren't just words. They were a door slamming shut. And without knowing it, Emily had opened another. Camilla stayed still long enough to feel the room shift around her, like she had stepped out of her own life and was watching strangers reenact a scene she didn't remember agreeing to. The kitchen lights felt too bright, the air too warm, the distance between her and Ryan wider than the Pacific she had refused to cross for him. She swallowed once slow, steady, then stepped back from the threshold of the conversation she was never meant to win. The tile floor felt colder under her feet than she expected. It grounded her as she moved away from the kitchen, her fingers grazing the wall, not for balance, just to confirm she was still capable of feeling something other than resignation. In the hallway's dim light, the words replayed again and again. Not because they hurt, but because they were true in a way Emily didn't intend. If Camilla couldn't handle it, if she couldn't handle the lies, the secrets, the quiet mockery she'd let them get away with for far too long, then maybe she didn't belong here anymore. Maybe she wasn't meant to. 8 feet from the kitchen, Camilla paused. Ryan laughed at something Emily said. That laugh didn't belong to a man holding on to his marriage. It belonged to someone entertained, indulged, and utterly comfortable with the damage he was helping create. Camilla closed her eyes. A different version of herself might have confronted them, demanded an explanation, pleaded for honesty. But that version of herself had been dying for months now, starved by excuses she'd forced herself to believe, suffocated by the weight of being the reasonable one, the forgiving one, the steady one. When she opened her eyes, she wasn't any of those women anymore. She walked straight to her office at the end of the hall. The quiet hum of her servers greeted her like an old friend, one that had never lied, never betrayed, never twisted truth into knots that only hurt her. This room lined with screens, code, and data had always made sense in ways human relationships rarely did. She sat, pressed a key, and watched the monitors blink awake. The system immediately displayed a banner, unreviewed flagged events, 43. 43. She stared at the number, feeling neither shock nor anger, only confirmation. Evidence was waiting. Answers were waiting. The truth had been waiting for her long before she was ready to see it. She leaned back in the chair, letting the tension roll out of her shoulders. The glow from the monitors illuminated the room with a cool, soft blue light, the kind that always helped her think clearly. She clicked the first file, a motion log from the kitchen, Emily entering the home at 7:22 p.m. On a Wednesday, when Camilla had been working at the firm downtown. Emily shouldn't have had a key. Emily shouldn't have been there at all. And yet there she was, smiling at her own reflection in the microwave door as she brushed her hair back. Camilla clicked the next file. Emily again, letting herself in at noon on a Saturday. Ryan walked in behind her, not surprised, not startled, comfortable. The air in the room cooled around Camilla. Her heartbeat stayed even. She had been suspicious. She hadn't been prepared for the pattern. She opened Audio Archive. The first recording crackled, then played softly through the speakers. Emily's laughter, high, bright, practiced. Ryan's voice followed. She won't question anything he said. Camilla trusts too easily. Emily hummed. Maybe she shouldn't. Camilla didn't flinch. She only listened. Every word stitched itself into a tapestry she had been too tired to examine until now. She clicked through more logs. A private zone being activated in the kitchen. User R. Hale. She replayed the timestamp 4 times, but the result didn't change. Ryan had deliberately disabled part of her home surveillance, a feature he shouldn't have known how to manipulate. But Emily knew how to watch her. And Ryan knew how to hide from her. Camilla's hands rested calmly on the desk. She wasn't afraid of the truth anymore. She was only marveling at how loudly it spoke once she stopped muting it. Her phone buzzed on the desk, a reminder from Helix Cyber Global. The email subject line glowed softly. Leadership role, Singapore. Final confirmation needed. The job she'd turned down twice. Once because Ryan said a stable home matters more than ambition. Once because Emily cried and begged, saying, "I need you here, I can't lose you too." Camilla clicked the email open. The offer still stood. The deadline hadn't moved. The universe, unlike Ryan or Emily, didn't gaslight. It repeated its message. She stared at her reflection in the darkened corner of the screen. A woman who had built entire security frameworks from nothing. A woman who solved complex threats for a living, but had ignored the simplest one in her home. A woman who had outgrown this house, these people, and the version of herself who kept shrinking to keep everyone else comfortable. She whispered into the quiet room, "Show me everything." The system responded instantly, loading logs, timelines, audio files, anomalies, pieces of a puzzle she finally felt ready to solve. She scanned the timeline again. Something new flashed, a device connection at 3:17 a.m. Guest network, unknown user, not Emily, not Ryan, not any device she recognized. Her breath hitched for 1 second, only one. Someone else had been watching, someone not in this house. Someone not tied to the petty games of jealousy and entitlement Emily played. Someone else. But that mystery could wait. What couldn't wait was the clarity blooming inside her chest. A clarity that felt like oxygen after months of breathing underwater. She walked back to the bedroom and watched Emily and Ryan through the crack in the door. They were laughing about something. Something small, something meaningless, something that used to make Camilla feel like the outsider in her own marriage. Now it made her feel nothing at all. She closed the door quietly. Then she opened her closet, reached for the hard-shell suitcase she hadn't touched in years, and placed it gently on the bed. Her hands didn't shake. Her heart didn't race. In the silence of her bedroom, she finally understood she didn't need to confront them. She didn't need to expose them. She didn't need to make anyone understand the truth, because the truth already existed. And she was done living in a life that didn't. Outside the door, Emily laughed again, bright and victorious. Ryan joined her. Camilla zipped the suitcase halfway, paused, and looked up at the ceiling, letting the moment settle into her bones. "I'm not going to hell," she whispered. "I'm going to Singapore." And for the first time in a very long time, she felt like she had somewhere worth going. Camilla woke before dawn, long before either of them would stir, long before the house would adopt its usual rhythm of footsteps, clattering dishes, and the soft hum of normalcy that always seemed to mock her for feeling out of place inside her own life. The sky outside was still a deep, muted blue, a color that made her think of quiet decisions and irreversible choices. She lay there for a moment listening, not for danger, not for betrayal, just for confirmation that the silence she felt inside herself was still real. Emily's voice the night before replayed in her mind, not with sharp edges but with a startling level of clarity. "If you can't handle me spending weekends with your husband, then go to hell." The way she'd said it, so casual, so entitled, felt like the final sentence in a chapter Camilla should have ended a long time ago. She sat up, stretched her fingers, once then stood and walked toward the living room. The hardwood floor felt cool beneath her feet. She didn't turn on the lights. She didn't need to. Her home was mapped in her mind the way her security systems were. Every corner, Every wire, every blind spot she had intentionally left, not physically but emotionally. The first light of morning bled through the blinds when she entered the kitchen. The quiet was almost peaceful. She opened the fridge not because she was hungry, but because she needed a task to anchor her. She reached for a water bottle, and as she did, she noticed a faint perfume lingering in the air, not hers. Not anything she ever bought. And strangely, not the scent Emily typically drowned herself in either. Something else, something unfamiliar. She closed the fridge door, inhaled slowly, and let the unease settle. A lesser version of herself might have brushed it off, but she wasn't that version anymore. Camilla turned toward the hallway just in time to hear Ryan coming down the stairs. His footsteps were slow, groggy, unbothered. When he walked into the kitchen, he didn't look surprised to see her awake. He looked relieved. "Morning," he said, gently rubbing the back of his neck the way he always did when he sensed she was upset but didn't want to deal with it. Camilla offered a polite nod. Nothing more. Ryan stepped closer. Too close. He reached out to touch her arm, then seemed to think better of it. "About last night," he began. "Emily didn't mean it. You know how she gets when she's stressed." A small quiet laugh escaped Camilla, not from humor but from disbelief. She meant every word she replied calmly. Ryan blinked, taken aback by her tone. He wasn't used to this version of her, the one who didn't soften her words to protect his comfort. "You're overreacting," he said quickly. "You always think the worst." "No," Camilla said, looking him directly in the eyes. "I've spent years thinking the best of you. That's the problem." He opened his mouth to argue, but she walked past him. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just decisively, like someone stepping around a piece of furniture that no longer served a purpose. "Cam," he started. She didn't turn. "I'm going for a walk." The air outside was crisp, carrying the faint scent of morning dew and pine, one of the few things she still genuinely loved about this neighborhood. She followed the familiar path around the block, the one she'd walked countless times while thinking through system designs or debugging code in her mind. But today, she wasn't analyzing anything technical. She was analyzing herself. Where had she disappeared over the years? When had she learned to bend until she nearly broke? Why had she allowed Emily and Ryan to define her position in her own life? She walked faster, letting the cool air fill her lungs and flush her system clean. Neighbors smiled as she passed. She smiled back. They didn't know anything. They didn't see the cracks. They only saw Ryan the charming and Emily the captivating. They saw the story Emily had been carefully writing for years. A story where Camilla was always the background character. When she returned home, the sun was higher, casting warm light across the living room floor. Emily was awake now, sprawled casually on the couch with a mug of coffee in hand like she owned the place. She glanced up at Camilla with a smirk that didn't even attempt to disguise the dismissal beneath it. "Morning," Emily said, stretching lazily. "You look tired." Rough night, Camilla didn't take the bait. She walked past her and headed to her office, but Emily wasn't done. "You know," she called out, her tone dripping sugar, "if you're upset about last night, just say so. Don't do that silent martyr thing. It's annoying." Camilla paused at the doorway of her office and turned. "You insulted me," she said simply, "and you enjoyed it." "Don't be dramatic," Emily scoffed. "I was telling the truth. You're insecure about me and Ryan. That's not my fault." Camilla's jaw tightened. Not in anger, just in realization. Emily didn't even understand the damage she caused because she had never experienced accountability. Never needed to. There had always been someone, parents, friends, boyfriends, even Camilla, absorbing the impact for her. Not anymore. Ryan entered the room, pausing when he saw the tension. "What's going on?" Emily lifted her mug and shrugged. "Your wife is upset because I told her the truth." Ryan's expression hardened. Emily seriously, "Oh, stop," she snapped. "You know she gets jealous. I'm just honest about it." Ryan looked at Camilla, expecting her to defend him, expecting her to say something self-deprecating to smooth things over. She didn't. "Actually," Camilla said softly, "I'm not jealous." Emily raised an eyebrow. "You sure I'm sure," Camilla replied, "because jealousy comes from wanting something you're afraid to lose. And I'm not afraid anymore." Emily's smirk faltered, just slightly. Ryan shifted uncomfortably. "Camilla, can we just—" "No," she said, not unkindly. "We can't keep pretending nothing's wrong. You two may be comfortable with this dynamic, but I'm not." Emily rolled her eyes dramatically. "Here we go." Camilla looked between them, her gaze clear and steady. "I'm done shrinking myself to fit around your excuses." Then she walked into her office and closed the door behind her. Her heart wasn't racing, her hands weren't shaking. She felt strangely anchored, as if finally saying the words she'd been swallowing for years had rooted her deeper into herself. She sat at her desk, turned on her monitors, and began reviewing the previous night's system alerts again. The number 43 glowed on the center screen. It was almost poetic how the truth waited patiently for her to be strong enough to receive it. She clicked through a few more motion logs, then paused when she reached a new notification: unauthorized network access attempt, 3:17 a.m. She opened the file. The screen filled with code, scrambled, interrupted, masked. Someone had tried to enter her network through the guest channel. Someone with skill. Someone who knew how to hide an entry point but didn't know she had created a forensic mode that captured shadow packets. It wasn't Emily, too sophisticated. It wasn't Ryan. He didn't know how to navigate her systems at all. Someone else. Someone she hadn't accounted for. Her pulse quickened, not from fear, but from awareness. This wasn't just a family conflict anymore. This wasn't just betrayal wrapped in jealousy and entitlement. There was something deeper. Something she hadn't uncovered yet. She saved the log, encrypted it, and backed it up onto her private server. Then she pushed her chair back and stood. Her suitcase was still on the bed upstairs, unpacked, waiting. Not because she wasn't ready, but because she needed this morning to confirm that what she felt last night wasn't impulsive. It wasn't. The truth had ripened overnight. She left her office, walked upstairs, and stood before the suitcase again. She unzipped it fully this time, took a deep breath, and began placing clothes inside, deliberate, measured movements that felt nothing like running away. It felt like alignment, like stepping toward something instead of just escaping something else. As she folded the last blouse, she heard Ryan and Emily downstairs arguing. Their voices overlapped, accusation layered over excuse, emotion layered over manipulation. The same cycle she had spent years smoothing over. She didn't rush. She didn't hurry. She placed the blouse inside, zipped the suitcase, and set it upright. A new chapter didn't always begin with fireworks or collapse. Sometimes it began with a quiet closing of a zipper. Camilla rested her hand on the handle of the suitcase and whispered, "Finally." She wasn't leaving because of Emily. She wasn't leaving because of Ryan. She was leaving because she was finally ready to choose herself. And once she made that choice, nothing in that house felt like it had any claim on her anymore. Camilla closed the door to her office behind her and let the quiet settle over her like a second skin. It was the one room in the entire house that had never lied to her. Screens still glowed softly from where she'd left them earlier, waiting like loyal sentinels for her return. She stepped closer, her bare feet soundless against the rug, and lowered herself into the chair that had held her through countless nights of analysis, design, and problem-solving. But tonight, she wasn't here to solve a client's puzzle. She was here to solve her own. She tapped the keyboard once. All 6 monitors brightened, illuminating the room with a pale blue halo. A banner blinked immediately. Unreviewed flagged events, 43. Not a small number, not an accident, not a coincidence. Camilla inhaled slow and steady, then clicked the first file. The playback loaded instantly. A video feed from the kitchen, time-stamped nearly 3 weeks earlier. The angle showed the door swinging open at 7:22 p.m. and Emily stepping inside with a tote bag slung over her shoulder. Camilla had been at work during that time frame. She remembered that night she'd stayed late debugging a deployment error. Emily should not have been here. Neither she nor Ryan had said anything about plans. Emily brushed her hair back with a practiced flick of her wrist, then reached up to adjust the overhead light. She stood there for a moment, staring at her reflection in the microwave door, as though admiring herself. Then she disappeared from view. Camilla clicked the next file. Another entry. Another timestamp during hours Camilla had not been home. Emily again, this time entering with a container of fruit, smiling at something on her phone. She lingered in the kitchen as if waiting for someone. And then seconds later, Ryan walked in behind her, his jacket already half off. Ryan said something the system's mic didn't completely capture, but Emily laughed. The same laugh she had offered freely the night she told Camilla to go to hell. Camilla's face didn't change. She leaned forward, clicked again, and moved through the logs slowly, methodically, the same way she'd analyze breach attempts or anomaly patterns on client systems. Her heartbeat stayed even. Her breathing never spiked. Feeling didn't sharpen or dull, it simply stepped aside to let clarity through. She clicked into the microphone logs. Audio file number 12 began with soft static before Emily's voice cut cleanly through. "She won't question anything," Emily said. "Camilla thinks the best of everyone. It's adorable," Ryan responded. "It's her weakness. Weakness." The word didn't slice through Camilla. It didn't bruise. It simply landed inside her with a weight that felt familiar. Too familiar. She had always believed the best of them. She had always believed love, familial or romantic, deserved patience. That patience had cost her more than she ever named out loud. Her fingers moved without hesitation to open another file. Audio file, number 14. The conversation was clearer this time, as if they had spoken right into the kitchen mic. "Emily. She'll never walk away. Trust me, she needs us more than we need her." Ryan, "I know. That's why she'll stay even if she hates this." Emily, "Good. Then we don't have to hide anything." Silence stretched for a moment, an intentional silence, Camilla realized. Then Emily whispered something too soft for the mic to catch. Ryan laughed. A short, low, familiar laugh. Camilla sat back slowly. Her spine relaxed against the chair. She wasn't surprised, not anymore. She wasn't hurt, she had run out of space for that. She wasn't even angry. What she felt was more like confirmation. The kind of confirmation she'd grown used to seeing in data patterns. When anomalies no longer hinted at a problem when they were the problem. She clicked to the next section, device behavior. Her home network map expanded across the largest monitor. Every device appeared: phones, laptops, assistants, smart home hubs. Most were labeled and familiar. 2 were not. Ryan's phone showed multiple instances of restricted sync patterns. Not unusual by itself, unless you knew that Camilla had once set up an automatic sync for him to help keep their schedules aligned. He'd disabled it during the same windows Emily had been in the house. And then there was the guest network entry at 3:17 a.m. An unknown device had connected briefly, then vanished. The MAC address was masked. Not an amateur trick, not something Emily would know how to do, not something Ryan could ever execute even accidentally. Camilla's hand hovered for a moment over the mouse. Then she pulled up the Advanced Analysis HUD. Shadow packets, partial traces, echo traffic. There it was. Someone else had been in her network. Someone with skill. Someone who wasn't part of this house and yet knew exactly when to slip into it. She bookmarked the file. She wasn't ready to unravel that knot yet. First, she needed to finish the one directly in front of her. She switched back to the camera archives. The next file was labeled Private Zone Activation. Kitchen. User R. Hale. She clicked. The footage was blank for 8 minutes. Just static, intentional static before the feed resumed. That more than anything else felt like a hand closing over her shoulder from behind. Not because of the betrayal it represented, but because of the intent. Ryan had disabled the cameras in a place he knew she rarely inspected, which meant he had gone into her system, which also meant Emily had taught him, or someone had taught both of them. The realization didn't shake her. It centered her. She reached for the mug beside her keyboard, discovered it empty, and set it aside without thought. Then she clicked into a file marked Clip, Living Room, Week 27. The footage loaded after a short delay. Emily sat on the couch, her leg crossed over Ryan's, scrolling through a presentation on her laptop. She leaned in to whisper something. Ryan smiled. She adjusted his collar. He didn't pull away. But the part that hollowed the air was what came next. Emily looked up straight at the camera, straight at the lens, straight at the device she shouldn't have known about. And she smiled, slow. Inevitable. Then she lifted one hand and tapped something out of frame. The camera feed went black. Camilla didn't blink. She rewound it once, twice, 3 times. Same movement, same certainty, same knowledge Emily should not possess. She closed the clip, took a breath, let it go. Not the betrayal, not the evidence, just the emotional thread that once bound her to the idea that she should care. That part slipped off her shoulders like a coat she didn't need anymore. She pushed back from the desk and walked toward the window. Morning light filtered through the blinds, warm and golden, washing over her hands. Outside, the world looked unchanged. Neighbors would soon walk dogs. Schools would open their doors. People would drink coffee and check emails and make choices they wouldn't think twice about. But for Camilla, the world had already shifted. She wasn't the woman who absorbed other people's behavior as if it were her responsibility to make it easier. She wasn't the sister who made excuses for Emily's cruelty. She wasn't the wife who tucked away her own needs so Ryan wouldn't feel threatened. She was the one who finally saw the truth and refused to look away from it. She turned back to the desk and pressed a single key. Export all evidence. Her system began collecting the last 90 days of camera feeds, microphone logs, access attempts, and behavioral anomalies into a clean, irrefutable package. Progress bars filled slowly, steadily, as though gathering the pieces of a puzzle she'd been assembling unconsciously for months. Camilla crossed her arms and leaned against the wall watching the data compile. She wasn't doing it for revenge. She wasn't doing it to expose them. She was doing it because truth deserved to be witnessed, even if she no longer intended to stay long enough to confront anyone with it. The final file completed. A soft chime echoed through the room. Camilla stepped forward, saved the package onto an encrypted drive, and closed the system. And then she whispered to herself, not in sadness, not in fear, but in clarity. I'm not leaving because they lied. I'm leaving because I'm finally done pretending I don't see it. Her decision didn't feel heavy. It felt merciful. She turned off the lights, letting the monitors fade one by one, their glow dissolving back into darkness. The truth no longer needed to shine here. She had already seen enough to walk away. Camilla clicked on the next audio file and rested her fingertips lightly on the desk, steadying herself. Not because she feared what she was about to hear, but because she wanted to feel the truth fully, without flinching, without granting it the power to wound. The speakers crackled softly before Emily's voice spilled into the room, high and confident and dripping with the brand of arrogance she'd sharpened since childhood. I mean seriously, Emily said with a laugh. Camilla makes everything so clinical. It's like talking to a spreadsheet. A chorus of giggles followed voices she didn't recognize, friends Emily had collected for validation rather than companionship. Another voice chimed in. But she's so smart. Isn't that good? Emily scoffed. Smart isn't the same as warm. She's just robotic. And Ryan needs someone who understands actual human emotion. Camilla blinked once, slow and detached. Robotic. She'd been called worse, though rarely by someone who owed their entire stability in life to her endless patience. She clicked to the next file. This time it was just Emily and Ryan. They were sitting close. She could hear the faint rustle of fabric, the clink of a mug being set on the table. Emily's voice softened, dripping with false sympathy. You know she's never going to give you what you need. Ryan sighed heavily. I know. I've tried. She just doesn't get it. Something inside Camilla shifted. Not bitterness, not grief. Recognition. This wasn't new. It was simply the first time she'd let herself hear what was always there. Emily continued, You deserve someone present. Someone who looks at you not at a screen. She's always in her own world, Ryan murmured. I feel like an accessory. An accessory. She almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because they had no idea how precisely they were describing themselves, not her. Camilla skipped forward. Another file. Another timestamp. This one began with a whisper. Emily, just imagine if she moved to Singapore. You and I could actually spend weekends together without sneaking around. Ryan. She won't go. She's too committed. Emily, no. She's too scared. Ryan hummed in agreement. Yeah, she's always been afraid to leave things behind. That was the moment Camilla felt something inside her chest unclench. She understood finally and fully why they'd been so comfortable. They weren't just betraying her. They were depending on her selflessness, counting on it, building their entire selfish comfort around it. She clicked another file. The microphone picked up Emily's voice again, but this time there was no laughter, just a low, venomous whisper. You want the truth, Emily said to someone, likely one of her friends. I could run circles around her emotionally. She works with computers all day. She doesn't get people. Ryan needs someone who knows how to love. Camilla's pulse didn't change. Her breath didn't catch. What she felt instead was clarity so profound it bordered on relief. She leaned back in her chair and let the words wash over her like cold water, cleansing and strangely invigorating. She pressed play on the next file. The audio was fuzzy at first, then sharpened. Ryan, if this ever blows up, Emily, it won't. She trusts you too much. Ryan, still, if it does, I'll just say she's obsessed with work. Everyone already thinks that. Emily laughed. Exactly. You'll look like the victim. Victim. Camilla stilled her hand, hovering above the mouse. So that was the plan. Not just betrayal, but narrative building, reputation shaping, preemptive victimhood. The realization didn't hurt. It freed her. They had never been afraid of losing her. They had been afraid of losing the version of her who absorbed all consequences. She clicked again. The next file was different, quieter, more intimate, as though they'd stepped closer to the microphone without realizing it. Emily. Do you think she suspects anything, Ryan? No. She's loyal? Too loyal. Emily, good. Just keep it that way. Camilla exhaled through her nose, not a sigh, a release. She clicked the next message archive. Text bubbles filled the screen, familiar formatting, unfamiliar content. Message thread. Emily and Ryan. Emily. She's at work. You still coming by, Ryan? Yeah, 15 minutes. Emily. Don't be weird this time, Ryan. You're the one who freaked out last week. Emily. That was only because she almost saw us leaving together. Ryan, relax. She sees what she wants to see. Camilla closed her eyes for a moment. Not because she needed to block anything out, but because she was absorbing a truth she had spent too long avoiding. She hadn't been blind. She had been loyal. And loyalty had been used as a shield for their cowardice. She opened another thread. Message thread. Emily and friend. Isn't this dangerous, Emily, only if she grows a backbone? Friend. You're playing with fire. Emily. She's too logical to lose control. She won't do anything dramatic. Camilla almost smiled. Dramatic wasn't her style, but decisive that she could do. She clicked another archive. Message thread. Ryan and colleague. Ryan, Camilla is brilliant, but she's cold. Colleague. You sure she seems dedicated? Ryan, dedicated to work, not to us, not to making a family. Colleague. You chose her. Ryan, yeah. And I'm choosing better now. Choosing better. Camilla leaned her elbows onto the desk and laced her fingers together, letting that phrase sit there like a stray puzzle piece she'd finally found a place for. Not painful, just revealing. She clicked the final audio file. It began mid-conversation. Emily. She makes me feel small. Ryan. That's not her fault. Emily, doesn't matter. I don't want to be around someone who reminds me of what I'm not. Ryan. You don't have to be. We'll figure something out. Emily, I want him to pick me, she whispered. I want to win. There it was. The root, not love, not desire, not even need, competition, jealousy, winning. Emily didn't want Ryan because she loved him. Emily wanted him because taking him from Camilla made her feel powerful, validated. Camilla stopped the file and let the silence rise in its place. She looked around her office, the servers, the cables, the blinking indicators, the silent architecture of logic and truth she had built with her own hands. This room had always reflected her. Honest, direct, intelligent, underestimated. She pressed her palm to the desk, grounding herself. She finally understood the full story. She wasn't losing anything. She was shedding something. She stood and crossed to the small window overlooking the street. Dawn had fully broken light spreading over the trees, the houses, the sidewalks, the kind of light that made everything look sharper, including her decision. She turned back toward the monitors and issued a final command: export all evidence, extended range, 90 days. The system began processing the entire backlog audio-video logs texts into one synchronized master file. She watched progress bars fill like slow-burning fuses, lighting up the truth. She didn't plan to use the data against them. She didn't plan to confront them. Truth didn't need to be weaponized. It only needed to be recognized. When the final file finished compiling, she saved it to a secure drive, encrypted it with a key only she knew then shut the entire system down. One by one, the screens went dark until the room held only her reflection in the window. A woman no longer confused. A woman no longer shrinking. A woman who could walk away because she finally knew she deserved to. She stepped out of her office, closed the door softly, and whispered to herself, "This isn't heartbreak. It's clarity." And clarity, she realized, was the beginning of freedom. The house was still dim when Camilla stepped into the hallway, suitcase half-packed upstairs, evidence archived in her office, and a silence settling over her like a second heartbeat. She hadn't slept. She hadn't needed to. Some decisions didn't drain a person, they clarified them. As she descended the stairs, she saw Emily in the kitchen, hips leaned against the counter like she owned the place. Ryan stood beside her, pouring coffee for them both. Their casual intimacy was almost laughable now. Emily reached out and straightened the collar on his shirt, and Ryan didn't even flinch. They looked like a pair rehearsing for an audience that didn't realize the show was already over. Camilla lingered at the bottom step just long enough to observe, not mourn, not ache, simply witness the truth as it breathed freely in the open. Emily caught sight of her and lifted her mug in a mock toast. "Morning, you're up early, big day, or just couldn't sleep?" Ryan glanced at Camilla, eyes flicking with brief guilt before smoothing over. "You want coffee?" "No," Camilla said. Her voice was calm, collected, peaceful in a way that made Emily narrow her eyes suspiciously. Camilla didn't owe either of them an explanation, and for the first time in years, she didn't attempt to offer one. She walked past them toward the living room to retrieve her charger. Her steps were slow, not out of hesitation, but because she was memorizing nothing. She wanted no last impressions of this house, no lingering emotions that could tether themselves to her. Behind her, she heard Emily huff. "She's sulking again." Ryan murmured something low, some excuse maybe, or perhaps just another attempt to avoid conflict. It didn't matter anymore. Camilla reached the edge of the living room and paused. A memory flickered the night she moved in, the way she'd believed this home would be a foundation for the dreams she'd built with Ryan. She let that memory drift away as easily as exhaling air. Not everything deserved a permanent place in her heart. She turned and went upstairs. In the bedroom, her suitcase waited. She opened the closet and began pulling out what she truly wanted to take. Not much. A few blouses she actually liked, the soft sweater her mother had given her, her laptop charger, a worn paperback she had read at least 6 times. She left the gifts from Ryan untouched. She left the matching mugs Emily had insisted on buying her. She left the framed photos of fake smiles and perfect holidays. Everything that belonged to them stayed with them. Everything that belonged to her fit neatly into one suitcase. As she folded the last item, her fingertips brushed against a scarf tucked into the corner of a drawer. Pale cream soft wool, the scarf Emily had gifted her just because last winter. It had a tear along the seam that Camilla hadn't noticed before. A perfect metaphor. She dropped it back into the drawer and closed it without ceremony. She zipped her suitcase closed halfway and stepped away for a moment, letting the symbolism settle. She was not running. She was not hiding. She was simply finishing something that had been ending for a long time. Her phone buzzed with an email notification. Helix Cyber Global Final Confirmation. Singapore. She opened it, read it, sighed. Then she pressed accept. No hesitation, no wait, no apology. The moment she did, something inside her shifted so profoundly it was almost physical, like a locked door finally swinging open in her chest. She moved through the room with a quiet certainty that felt new. She unplugged her devices from the smart home system, deleted her user profiles, revoked Ryan's emergency access permissions. She wiped her presence clean from the home, not out of spite, but because she didn't intend to be part of this structure anymore. When she stepped back into the hallway, the house felt hollow, but not like loss, more like a shed skin. She headed downstairs again, suitcase wheels rolling softly behind her. As she reached the bottom, she heard Emily's voice rising in frustration. "I'm just saying, Ryan, if she has a problem with us working together, that's her insecurity, not ours." I know, Ryan muttered. Emily scoffed. "Honestly, she should be thanking me. I make her look interesting." The words floated toward Camilla like a breeze that couldn't touch her. She stepped into the kitchen doorway, and both of them turned. Emily's phrase died halfway in her throat. "I'm heading out," Camilla said softly. Ryan frowned. "Where out?" Emily snorted. Wow, cryptic. Camilla didn't respond. Instead, she reached into the drawer, removed the spare house key, and placed it gently on the counter. It made a soft metallic sound. That tiny sound shook Ryan more than any argument ever could. "What? What's that supposed to mean?" he asked. Camilla didn't owe him an explanation, so she didn't give him one. She simply said, "Thank you for the clarity," and walked out of the kitchen. "No, hold on, Camilla," Ryan called after her, his voice cracking slightly. Emily whispered something, a sharp hiss of annoyance or panic Camilla couldn't tell. She didn't look back. She didn't need anything from their faces anymore. She reached the front door, opened it slowly, and paused on the threshold. It wasn't sentiment that stopped her. It was instinct. She sensed movement behind her, the kind of presence that didn't belong to someone who loved her or betrayed her. A different worry brushed the back of her mind, the same one that had whispered to her when she saw that unknown device accessing her network at 3:17 a.m. But when she scanned the street, nothing appeared out of place. Just morning light, the hum of a distant engine, the cool breeze of a new beginning. Still, her certainty deepened. Someone else was part of this story. Someone she hadn't yet seen fully. She stepped out and closed the door behind her. The latch didn't echo. It exhaled. She walked toward her car, suitcase wheels tapping along the path. Each tap felt like a heartbeat returning to its rightful owner. Inside the car, she took one last look at the house, not to reminisce, not to mourn, just to acknowledge the version of herself who had lived there. "I'm done," she whispered. Then she drove away, before Ryan even reached the front door. When she arrived at the airport, the early morning crowd was light. People hurried past with purpose, unaware they were sharing air with someone quietly changing the direction of her life. Camilla moved through security with the ease of someone who had rehearsed leaving in her mind for years. In the boarding area, she sat, hands folded loosely in her lap, watching planes rise into the sky, metal bodies, breaking gravity, choosing ascent. She wondered briefly when she had forgotten she could do that for herself. Another vibration buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at her phone. A system alert. Unauthorized access attempt. 3:17 a.m. pattern repeated. Origin unknown. Her pulse didn't quicken, but she paid attention. Someone had tried again, and whoever they were watching her movements too closely to be random. She saved the alert and tucked the phone away. Her flight was called. She stood, rolled her suitcase forward, stepped onto the jet bridge with a calm she felt all the way into her bones. As she found her seat and buckled in, she exhaled fully for the first time in months. Not a trembling breath, not a hesitant one, a clean one. The kind of breath a person takes when they understand they're not escaping. They're moving toward something. The plane taxied down the runway. Engines trembled. Lights flicked along the cabin ceiling. Then the aircraft surged forward, lifted, and severed its tie to the ground. Below her the city shrank, and with it the version of Camilla who had accepted less than she deserved. She didn't know what Singapore would hold, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She wasn't going to hell. She was going exactly where she chose. And that made all the difference. Camilla woke before her alarm, her mind already clear, her body already steady. The room was still dark, the air cool and unmoving, the kind of quiet that made decisions feel irreversible. She turned off the alarm before it could chirp, slipped out of bed, and moved through the room with slow, precise motions. Her suitcase stood near the door, zipped and ready, the quiet symbol of a life she no longer intended to negotiate with. She padded down the stairs, avoiding the creaky step out of habit, not fear, and stepped into the living room where the faint glow of streetlights seeped through the blinds. The silence felt heavier today, not oppressive, but expectant. She reached the front door, rested her hand on the deadbolt, and turned it. The moment she opened the door, a light snapped on behind her. She glanced up. The porch sensor light. Strange. She had turned that system off the night before. A tiny hum rippled down her spine, not panic, just awareness. Something had been altered, but she didn't linger on it. She stepped onto the porch, pulling her suitcase quietly behind her, and let the door close with a soft, final click. She didn't leave a note for explanation. She didn't need to. She had said everything that mattered when she placed the spare key on the counter yesterday morning. The air was sharp cold enough that her breath formed a faint, dissolving cloud. She inhaled deeply and walked toward her car. The wheels of her suitcase rolled smoothly across the concrete, each quiet rotation a heartbeat, marking distance from the life she was finally shedding. She loaded the suitcase into the trunk, then settled behind the wheel, gripping it lightly. Before starting the engine, she looked at the house one last time, not with longing, not with nostalgia. Just acknowledgement. She had survived many versions of herself within those walls. She wasn't taking any of them with her. The drive to the airport was quiet. Not a single call from Ryan or Emily, too early for their chaos to begin. The sun hadn't yet risen, and the sky carried that dim blue promise of change. Camilla let the hum of the engine comfort her. Every mile was a breath. Every turn was a release. At the airport, everything smelled of coffee and disinfectant. Rolling suitcases echoed across the polished floors. Travelers murmured to one another, unaware that she was quietly walking away from a life built on false promises and hollow loyalties. She checked in past security and found a seat near the gate. Her hands rested loosely in her lap. Her phone vibrated only once, an automated message from Helix confirming her flight arrangements in Singapore. She turned the screen face down. If Ryan or Emily called, she didn't intend to hear it. 30 minutes later, the plane boarded. As she stepped through the jet bridge, she felt the shift, not the dramatic cinematic kind, but the kind that settled deep in the bones. The kind of shift that meant she belonged to herself again. She took her seat by the window. The engines roared softly as the aircraft began to taxi. She placed her palm against the cool window as the airport lights blurred. Then the world fell away beneath her as the plane lifted, carried her higher, farther, freer. Somewhere over the ocean, her phone buzzed again, another alert from her system back home. Unauthorized access attempt. Denied. Same signature as the 3:17 a.m. breach. Not Ryan. Not Emily. Someone else. She logged the attempt into an off-grid folder and rested her head against the seat. She didn't need to solve that now. She closed her eyes as the clouds swallowed the world below her. By the time she landed in Singapore, the morning had already blossomed into heat. The airport was awash in warm light and the murmur of travelers moving with purpose. She stepped into the terminal and inhaled the dense, humid air. It wrapped around her like a welcome she had never known she needed. Her driver waited with a small placard displaying her name. He loaded her suitcase and whisked her into the city, weaving through streets bright with storefronts, blinking crosswalk signals, and early risers grabbing iced kopi from corner cafes. The apartment Helix had arranged for her sat high above the harbor. When she opened the door, sunlight poured across the vast living space, white walls, clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking water and steel. This place held no memories, no ghosts, no obligations. She walked through each room, touching nothing, absorbing everything. When she reached the balcony, she stepped outside and gripped the railing lightly. The city stretched outward in shimmering layers, pulsing with energy. She hadn't even unpacked, and already she felt more at home than she had in years. Later that afternoon, she arrived at the Helix Singapore office. A trainee at the front desk greeted her with genuine enthusiasm, not the polite disinterest she was used to back home. Colleagues shook her hand warmly. A senior engineer approached her with a smile so wide it almost startled her. "We've heard incredible things," he said. "We've been waiting for someone with your expertise." She nodded politely, though inside a quiet realization settled. She had spent years letting people convince her she was too much, too intense, too logical, too ambitious. And here those same traits were seen as strengths, not flaws. During her onboarding meeting, she opened her laptop. Immediately, a notification blinked at the corner of her screen. Security alert attempted access from external source. She clicked it open. The metadata displayed a pattern that didn't match anything she'd seen Ryan or Emily capable of. The signature was clean, sophisticated, deliberate. Whoever this was, they were following her, not her house, not her network, her. She saved the alert into an encrypted folder and closed the window before anyone could see. Helix Singapore had no idea they'd inadvertently brought a cyber ghost into their sphere. She would deal with it later. Back in Portland, the storm began without her. Emily woke first, walking into the kitchen, expecting to find Camilla's quiet deference waiting for her, like some kind of daily offering. Instead, she found an empty room. The coffee maker untouched, no suitcase in the hallway, no note on the counter besides the key Camilla had left hours earlier. Emily's confusion quickly morphed into panic. Ryan stumbled into the kitchen moments later. "Where is she? Did she leave early?" "She's gone," Emily's snapped voice rising. "She really left." Ryan blinked in shock. She wouldn't just Emily shoved the key toward him. She did. They tried calling her. Ryan first 5 times, then Emily 3. Every call went to voicemail. When that didn't work, they tried logging into the home system to see if she'd left any digital trail. But the system denied them both with a sharp beep and a cold message: access revoked. Ryan froze. "She locked us out." "Yes," Emily hissed. "And I can't even get into the cameras. There's nothing." She deleted everything. But Camilla hadn't deleted anything. She had simply reclaimed what was hers. While their panic rose like floodwater, Camilla stood on the balcony of her new apartment, letting the Singapore breeze wash over her skin. Cars hummed in the distance. Ships drifted across the harbor. Her life felt expansive again, wide and uncontainable. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown Singapore number. She lifted it slowly. The message read, "Where are you?" Camilla stared at the screen for a long moment. It wasn't from Ryan. It wasn't from Emily. The area code confirmed what her instincts already knew. This was someone here. She closed the message, locked her phone, and tightened her grip on the balcony railing. Not fearfully, not anxiously, simply aware. Someone was following the trail she had left behind. Someone who understood her systems well enough to slip into their shadows. Whoever they were, they had reached Singapore first. But Camilla had something now that she hadn't had in Portland space. Strength, a life she had chosen. She stepped back inside, shut the balcony door, and drew in a steady breath. She wasn't running anymore. She was stepping fully into the person she had always been meant to become. And if someone was watching, they were about to see a version of her they had never imagined. The glass doors of Helix Singapore slid open with a soft hiss, as Camilla stepped inside, the cool white light washing over her like a quiet baptism. She paused for half a second, letting the hum of servers, the rhythmic clicking of keyboards and the faint scent of fresh coffee settle into her senses. For so long she'd worked in rooms where her brilliance felt like an inconvenience. Here, the air itself seemed to make space for her. "Ms. Hart," a voice called. Camilla turned to see Elaine Joe, sharp suit, sharper gaze approaching with a stride that radiated authority. "Welcome to Helix Asia," Elaine said, warmly extending a hand. "We've been following your work for years. We always knew you'd end up here." The sentence hit Camilla with unexpected force. Following her work, not her reputation, not her sacrifices, not the version of her Ryan and Emily always whispered about. Her work. Camilla nodded, accepting the handshake. "I'm glad to finally be here." "You'll meet your team shortly," Elaine said. "They've been eager." That word carried an extra weight. Eager, not skeptical. Eager, not threatened. Eager to learn from her. It was almost enough to make her chest tighten. As they walked through the corridor, screens displayed lines of code, live attack simulations, threat alerts, and global system dashboards. Every motion, every sound felt familiar, like she had stepped into a version of her life that fit. Elaine guided her into a large conference room. A dozen engineers stood, each one watching her with recognition she wasn't accustomed to. Admiration without envy. Respect without pretense. One young analyst, barely 25, handed her a small welcome card. "We're glad you're here," he said, voice sincere. "We've been needing someone who thinks like you do." Camilla allowed herself a small smile. "Thank you." They settled in as the meeting began. Within minutes, the team presented a complex regional security issue, an anomaly in cross-border data transfer logs. It was messy, layered, and tangled with outdated encryption protocols. Someone asked, "Any suggestions?" Camilla leaned forward, studied the screen for maybe 10 seconds, then pointed at a particular transfer line. "Your breach pattern isn't coming from the inbound logs," she said. "It's in the outbound confirmations. Someone is looping handshake protocols to disguise the exfiltration." Silence. Then a collective murmur of stunned realization. Elaine blinked. "That is exactly the flaw we missed." A ripple of impressed laughter moved through the team. Someone whispered, "She's brilliant." Someone else, "Finally." And in that moment, Camilla felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not pride, not vindication, but alignment. She was exactly where she was meant to be. After the briefing, Elaine pulled her aside. "Your predecessor left abruptly under strange circumstances. Some internal concerns were raised. If anything feels off, you tell me." Camilla tilted her head. Strange how Elaine hesitated. "Let's just say, unexpected departures aren't uncommon when people realize how powerful our systems really are." The words lodged somewhere deep inside Camilla, a quiet note of caution. She filed it away for later. Half a world away, Portland descended into chaos. Ryan sat in a small HR conference room, sweating through his shirt, as the head of compliance replayed footage from the Aspen retreat. His laughter with Emily, his casual mention of confidential client details, his flattery and excuses, it was all on display. "You violated multiple protocols," the HR representative said. "This is not a misunderstanding, it's misconduct." Ryan rubbed his forehead. "It wasn't like that. Emily pushed me to, so you allowed an unauthorized individual to influence your behavior during a corporate event," she asked flatly. Ryan faltered. The verdict was inevitable. "We're suspending you pending full investigation." Meanwhile, Emily sat in her own office as her supervisor laid out printouts of falsified reports she'd compiled using stolen Helix case studies. "You used proprietary data to pitch clients," her supervisor said. Emily scoffed. "Everyone embellishes their portfolio. Embellishing is not the same as theft." The supervisor slid another sheet forward. "And your live stream with Ryan violated our media policy. Effective immediately, you are on unpaid suspension." For the first time, Emily's confidence cracked. "What am I supposed to do now?" she whispered. Her supervisor didn't answer. Back in Singapore, the day was bright when Camilla returned to her apartment, the sunset painting gold across the harbor. She set her bag down and opened her laptop to review onboarding documents. The cursor blinked as she typed in her passcode. The moment her desktop loaded, a red notification flashed, "Security alert, unauthorized attempt to access your personnel file. Source Helix internal network. Admin level clearance." Camilla froze, not in fear, but focus. Someone inside Helix had tried to access her file. Not a random breach, someone with authority. She opened the metadata. The timestamp lined up not with office hours, but early morning. She traced the IP signature. It was scrubbed clean, too clean. Her mind went instantly analytical. Either someone was investigating her, or someone wanted her information without being seen. She saved the log and encrypted it. She would examine it later. Her phone buzzed, a video call request from Emily. Camilla let it ring until it timed out. Moments later, a message arrived. "Please answer. Everything is falling apart." A second one, "Ryan won't help me. Everyone is blaming me." A third, "Chikong the Bomek Mhuve. You can't." Camilla read the messages in silence. She typed nothing. She owed her nothing. The phone rang again, this time from Ryan. She still didn't answer. The next voicemail came through automatically. Ryan's voice was frayed, frantic. "Camilla, please, I need to explain. Emily, she's saying I pressured her. She's saying I ruined her career. But you know how she gets." You know, Camilla stopped listening halfway through. She deleted the voicemail without a hint of regret. Later that evening, as she sat on her balcony, letting the breeze sweep across her shoulders, her phone buzzed again. This time from her best friend, Lyona. Camilla answered. "Are you safe?" Lyona asked immediately. "Yes," Camilla said softly. "I am." "Good," Lyona breathed. "Because things back here are messy. But also someone asked about you." Camilla's spine straightened. "Who? A man I didn't recognize. He asked where you were staying." Camilla's stomach cooled. "Did Emily send him?" she asked. "No." She looked shocked when I mentioned it. This wasn't about her. Or Ryan. Camilla gripped the balcony railing more tightly. The city lights blurred. Lyona hesitated. "Cam, this guy knew you'd taken the Singapore job before anyone else did." Camilla closed her eyes. So the watcher wasn't guessing. He was informed, prepared, tracking her moves with precision. "Be careful," Lyona whispered. "I don't like the feeling around this." Camilla nodded. "I will." They hung up. She stayed on the balcony another minute, letting the air settle around her, then walked inside and shut the sliding door. Her apartment felt safe, new, clean, untouched. But beyond that, safety was something else. Someone else. At nearly midnight, a final notification flashed onto her screen. "Unknown device detected near your apartment. Signal strength 82%, location within 30 meters. Camilla stared at the alert. Then she inhaled deeply, steadying herself. She wasn't the woman who ignored danger. She wasn't the woman who accepted betrayal. And she wasn't the woman who bowed under the weight of anyone's expectations. Not anymore. "Whoever you are," she murmured into the darkness, "you're not the one in control." She closed her laptop, locked her balcony door, and stood before the window overlooking the glowing city, its skyscrapers shimmering like new opportunities. Tomorrow she would walk into Helix again as a woman in full command of her life. And if someone was watching, good. Let them see exactly who she was becoming. Camilla arrived at the office early, the city still stretching awake beneath the soft haze of morning. She stepped into the corridor leading toward the security operations room. Her mind, clear and sharp, already aligning itself with the tasks ahead. Yet as she reached her desk and opened her laptop, the first email that blinked across her screen froze her mid-motion. Subject: HR investigation update. Sensitive content attached. She didn't open it. Not yet. She closed her eyes, briefly inhaled, letting the cool, filtered air fill her lungs. She wanted to start her morning from a place of strength, not disruption. But then before she could turn toward her team, another email slid into her inbox flagged from an unknown sender. You were right to leave them. Watch what happens next. Her pulse tightened, not with fear but with the cold precision of recognition. Someone was still observing. Someone who understood the consequences beginning to unfold back in Portland. But Camilla clicked away from the inbox. Not now. She had work to do, work she actually wanted, work that valued her. Across the ocean, Ryan was sitting in a gray HR conference room, palms sweating, leg bouncing uncontrollably. A compliance officer tapped a pen against a stack of printed documents. Let's begin, the officer said. We've reviewed the live stream from your Aspen retreat. Ryan swallowed hard. The officer pressed play. There he was on screen, laughing with Emily beside a fire pit, glass in hand, revealing details about a high-profile client they were under NDA to protect. Mr. Hale, the officer continued, disclosing this information publicly represents a severe breach of confidentiality. Ryan tried to speak, stammering. It wasn't Emily was recording. And you participated, the officer cut in. You volunteered information. Ryan rubbed his forehead. It was just talk. We didn't think that much is clear. The officer pushed papers toward him. For now, you are suspended pending a full investigation. Ryan stared down at the signature line, hands trembling. His entire chest felt too tight, too hot. Everything he'd hoped to hide was sliding into the open. In another part of the city, Emily sat rigidly across from her PR agency supervisor as printed screenshots spilled across the table, falsified reports, copied system analyses, and internal Helix slides she'd never been authorized to use. You misrepresented proprietary information, her supervisor said, voice clipped. These slides belong to Helix Cyber Global. You did not work on these cases. Emily crossed her arms. I was just borrowing examples. That's not how this industry works. Emily rolled her eyes. Everyone embellishes their work. Why am I being singled out? Her supervisor leaned forward. You weren't singled out. You were caught. The words hit harder than intended. Emily's jaw clenched. This isn't fair. You don't understand. We do, her supervisor interrupted. And that's why you're suspended indefinitely. For the first time in years, Emily couldn't summon the sharp confidence she relied on. The room felt too big, her excuses too thin, her control slipping like water through her fingers. Meanwhile, Camilla's inbox pinged again as she reviewed a regional threat model. A friend from Portland had written, Ryan is falling apart. He says it's all Emily's fault. She says it's all his. No one's backing them up. Another message blinked in immediately after. People are talking. They're saying the affair wasn't even subtle, that Emily bragged about it. And then the heaviest one, Camilla. Everyone knows the truth now. Camilla didn't smile. She didn't feel vindicated. She simply felt the quiet click of justice, natural, inevitable, and not dependent on her voice at all. For years she had bent herself into knots trying to convince others who she was. Now, without lifting a finger, the truth had stepped forward on its own. Later that afternoon, when she finally opened the HR investigation email she'd ignored earlier, she found everything laid out cleanly: Ryan's failed attempt to access her old marital accounts, his unauthorized attempts to log into her home security dashboard, his digital signature linked to the private zone camera blackout. Emily's presence in their home during hours Camilla hadn't been there. And included in the packet as evidence surveillance footage showing the two entering the house together, an audio clip of Emily saying she wanted Camilla out of the picture, and logs revealing that Ryan had used joint funds to pay for expenses during the retreat. Every piece matched flawlessly with the trail Camilla had already uncovered herself, but one line caught her attention. Final note. An unidentified third party attempted to access your personal archives 6 months ago. Investigation incomplete. 6 months ago. Long before she'd left. Long before Ryan and Emily understood the depth of their betrayal. Someone else had been watching even then. She leaned back in her chair. For a moment, the world narrowed to a fine, sharp point. This wasn't just about family. This wasn't just betrayal. This was surveillance. the kind she hadn't authorized. While she sorted through the files, Emily's world continued collapsing. Her friends stopped answering her messages. A cousin posted online, "Some people deserve the fallout they create." Another commented beneath it, "We all saw how close Emily and Ryan really were." Emily tried to defend herself, typing frantic replies, deleting them, reposting others. None of it mattered. The narrative she had once controlled now belonged to the people who had watched her pride twist into cruelty. She called her mother, crying, "They're turning everyone against me." Her mother sighed, "They're not turning people against you, Emily. They're seeing what's true." Emily threw her phone across the bed. Ryan didn't fare any better. He paced his apartment, running both hands through his hair, breathing too quickly. His phone buzzed again. A colleague had sent him an audio file. When Ryan played it, his own voice filled the room. "Camilla never knew how to be a wife. She doesn't understand feelings. She's not enough." Followed by laughter. The colleague's message read, "I defended you for years. I won't anymore." Ryan's knees weakened. For the first time, he realized he wasn't losing Camilla. He had already lost every version of himself she once believed in. Back in Singapore, Camilla stepped into her quiet apartment and set her bag down. The night air drifted through the open balcony door, warm and sweet, carrying the scent of the marina. She walked toward the glass railing, letting the lights of the skyline settle her. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She walked back and picked it up. Another alert. "Unauthorized attempt detected. Source near your location. Signal range 30 meters. 30 meters. Someone was close." She moved toward the balcony again, scanning the sidewalk below. People walked in pairs and groups, in slow paces and quick strides. Nothing looked out of place. Nothing looked wrong. And yet her system did not lie. She closed the balcony door and lowered the blinds. She wasn't scared. She wasn't shaken. She was aware, hyper-focused. For years she'd been gaslit into questioning her instincts. Now she listened to them without hesitation. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Lyona. Camilla answered immediately. "Are you sitting down?" Lyona asked. "I can," Camilla replied. "Emily told people someone else has been digging into your life. Someone she didn't hire, someone Ryan didn't hire." Camilla's hand tightened around the phone. "Who I don't know, but people are frightened. Whoever this person is, they know things. Too many things." Camilla closed her eyes, feeling threads connect. The 3:17 a.m. network breach. The masked device signatures. The admin-level access attempt at Helix. The proximity alert tonight. Someone was moving in her shadow. Not clumsy, not personal, systematic. She took a slow breath. "Thank you for telling me," she said. Cam Lyona whispered. "Be careful. This isn't just family drama anymore." "I know," Camilla said softly. "I'm prepared." When she ended the call, she walked to the window again, planting one hand on the glass. Her reflection stared back. Not the woman they underestimated. Not the woman they manipulated. Not the woman who used to shrink herself to make everyone else comfortable. This Camilla was precise, certain, untouchable. And whoever was watching her had no idea what kind of woman they were dealing with. She stepped back, closed her laptop, powered down the lights, and whispered into the quiet room. "I'm not afraid of the truth. I never was." The darkness settled gently around her, not as a threat, but as a curtain before the next act, one she would no longer perform for anyone but herself. I woke the next morning to the faint buzz of my phone vibrating against the nightstand, a soft but insistent reminder that the world I had left behind still hadn't finished unraveling. For a moment, I simply lay there listening to the hum of the city outside my window, the distant whir of early commuters, the soft rumble of delivery trucks, the steady pulse of a place that did not know my past and did not expect anything from me except the work I chose to give. When I finally reached for the phone, the screen was lit with notifications, missed calls, unread messages, and at the top of the list, an email from Helix Legal marked urgent. The contrast between the warmth of the Singapore morning and the cold precision of that word did not escape me. I stood, wrapped my robe around my waist, and stepped onto the balcony. A warm breeze washed across my face as the harbor glittered below. The world looked ordinary, peaceful. And yet something in the air held tension, as if the city sensed the shift inside me. I opened the email. Subject: immediate action required. Attempted access by former spouse Ms. Hart. We have processed your report of unauthorized attempts to breach your accounts. Upon further investigation, we confirmed 3 additional attempts by Mr. Hale using outdated credentials. These have been logged and escalated. Please review the attached documents and confirm whether you wish to file a formal security violation. Attached were detailed logs clean in their incrimination timestamps, IP addresses, failed authentication paths, evidence, cold, irrefutable evidence. But it was the final line that caught my breath. Note: a second party has also attempted access using a masked signature. This individual demonstrates high-level proficiency. Investigation open. I gripped the railing, the humid air thickening around me. Not Ryan, not Emily. Someone else. Someone watching both sides of my life, the part I had left and the part I was building. I forwarded the report to my private vault and stepped back inside, closing the balcony door with deliberate calm. I wasn't afraid. I was awakening. The office at Helix Singapore greeted me with bright light and warm smiles, a stark contrast to the messages pulling at the edges of my morning. My team had gathered for a cross-regional briefing, and Elaine waved me into the boardroom. "You're just in time," she said. "We're reviewing last month's anomaly pattern." I nodded, took my seat and listened as charts, maps, and code windows lit up the wall. Threat models from across Asia, breach attempts spiking in Tokyo, a massive phishing campaign in Jakarta. It was the kind of complex chaos I thrived in. Still, somewhere beneath the surface, my instincts kept circling the same quiet question: who was following me? When the meeting concluded, Elaine motioned me aside. "You're fitting in well," she said. "The team respects you, and honestly, we needed someone who could do what you do." "That's kind of you," I answered. "It's not kindness, it's accuracy." Her expression shifted, gentler but intentional. "But I need to ask, is everything all right with your relocation? Any complications? Complications?" She didn't know how sharp that word felt today. "Yes," I said. "Everything is fine." A partial truth, a functional one. Elaine studied me for half a second, then nodded. "Good. Because we've received a request from the U.S. office. They want you to oversee a joint investigation into an access breach on their side." My pulse flickered. "What kind of breach?" I asked. "An employee tried to access restricted archives using personal credentials," she said. "But that's not the only issue. The system flagged a second user who attempted to hide inside the breach." "A second user?" I kept my face neutral. "Do they know who it is?" "No," Elaine said. "That's why they want you." The irony wasn't lost on me that I had fled a life full of lies only to be asked to untangle someone else's hidden truth. "I'll take it," I said. She smiled. "I knew you would." By noon, my phone was vibrating nonstop. Ryan, Emily, mutual acquaintances, all spilling pieces of their unraveling lives into the digital void. I ignored the first several calls, but the messages kept coming, the desperation rising with each hour. From Ryan: "I need to talk to you. Please." I didn't know this would happen. A few minutes later, they suspended me. They're saying I violated confidentiality. Can you help fix this? Then Cam: "I didn't do anything wrong." Emily twisted everything. More time passed. Then you left. That's why this is happening. My stomach tightened, not from guilt, but from the poisonous absurdity of his logic. He destroyed his own career. He betrayed his vows. He underestimated me. And somehow, in the ruins he had built, he still imagined himself the victim. I set the phone down, letting the screen go dark. I wouldn't let his panic bleed into the new life I was constructing. Meanwhile, messages from Emily took a different tone. "Answer me." "Then everyone is attacking me online. You have to speak up. Then I'm your sister. You owe me. Then if you don't help me, I swear I'll..." The next message came half an hour later. "I just got fired. Are you happy now?" I read it in silence. Not happy, not satisfied, not triumphant. Just unburdened. After lunch, I met with my team for a systems audit. They were bright, confident, eager to learn. Working alongside them steadied something inside me, reminding me why I had come here, why I had walked away, why I did not regret a single step. Near the end of the session, my computer chimed. A nearby device has attempted to connect to your encrypted drive. I froze, not outwardly but internally, with the sharp, clean pause of instinct. The device was within 20 meters, the same range as the alert last night. I excused myself, politely stepped out into the empty hallway and opened my scanner app. The signal pulsed faintly nearby but moving. Someone had followed me to Helix, someone with skill, someone with access. I headed toward the stairwell, descending one floor, letting the signal trail behind me like a faint electronic shadow. Whoever it was moved when I did. Paused when I did. Not an accident. Not a glitch. A watcher. Then just as quickly the signal vanished. Cut clean. Whoever they were, they knew when they'd been detected. Back at my desk, another message awaited me. From an unknown encrypted sender. They know you're here. Stop pretending this is just about family. I felt my heartbeat slow, focused, intentional. Not panic, preparation. Because the truth was finally stepping out from behind the curtain. This wasn't about betrayal anymore. It wasn't about Ryan or Emily. It wasn't even about the lies they told. Someone else had been moving in the background the entire time. Someone who knew my systems. Someone who watched my movements. Someone who had crossed oceans to stay close. And for the first time since leaving Portland, I felt the faint spark of something that wasn't fear or hurt. It was resolve, the kind that settles into your spine when you understand the full shape of the storm approaching. I closed my laptop gently and sat back in my chair, the city humming below the world, shifting quietly around me. Whoever was watching me, they were about to discover that I was not the woman they expected. I was far more dangerous than the one they had followed, and I was ready to face whatever came next. I walked into the office the next morning with a steadiness that felt almost engineered, a collected calm, built from clarity, distance, and a growing understanding that someone far more dangerous than Ryan or Emily was now threading themselves into my life. The glass walls of Helix caught the morning light, scattering it across polished floors, casting long reflections of passing employees. Everything looked normal. Everything sounded normal. And yet something beneath the surface hummed with alertness. My alertness. When I reached my workstation, my laptop lit up instantly, as if it too sensed the need for vigilance. A new notification blinked across the upper corner. Unrecognized signal detected near your device. Tracking suspended by external override. External override. Someone had not only followed me, they had overridden my system. My system. That realization settled inside me like a cold blade, not painful, but sharpening every sense I had. Before I could analyze the metadata, Elaine appeared beside my desk. "Camilla," she said, her tone quiet but firm. "We need you in the incident room." I rose without question. The urgency in her voice wasn't panic, it was respect. They needed my mind, my precision, my control. The part of myself I had spent years minimizing for other people was exactly the part they valued here. We entered the incident room, where the large wall display was filled with cascading alerts, red-yellow pulsing in rhythmic bursts. Engineers stood clustered around terminals, murmuring, typing furiously, their attention pulled taut like drawn wires. "What happened?" I asked, stepping forward. Elaine pointed to the center screen. We detected a breach attempt from an unknown external node. High-level encryption masked IP shifting signatures. "It's not targeting Helix directly, it's targeting one of our employees." My breath stilled. "Who?" She turned to me, eyes sober. "You?" The room quieted for a moment, not because my name held weight, but because the nature of the attack did. Personal breaches were rare. Masked personal breaches were unprecedented. I stepped closer to the screen. Lines of code pulsed in bright red threads, complex, layered, adaptive. This wasn't amateur work. This wasn't even mid-tier work. This was someone who understood my systems inside out. someone who had studied my patterns long before I arrived in Singapore. I zoomed in on the breach signature. "It's not a brute force attack," I said. "It's a reconnaissance map. They're testing vulnerabilities, studying response latency, mapping internal shadows." One of the engineers swallowed hard. "That's terrifyingly accurate." "It's familiar," I murmured. And it was. The breach pattern echoed something from my past, a scrubbed, ghost-like signature I'd encountered once years ago, buried deep in a private case file from an abandoned Helix project. A rogue contractor, a system ghost, a hacker who'd vanished into digital static, a man they called Calder. Before I could look deeper, Elaine said, "The U.S. office called this morning. They want you to assist them with their internal breach. Apparently someone tried to access your personnel file last week." She paused. "Camilla?" They believe the two breaches may be related. The air tightened around us. Related, connected, not random, a pattern. I nodded slowly. "Send me everything." Elaine squeezed my shoulder, once firm, steady. "Camilla, whatever this is, you don't handle it alone. But I already knew I would. Not out of stubbornness. Because no one else understood the shape of the ghost behind the breach." That afternoon, while Singapore hummed outside my window, I sat in my apartment surrounded by evidence, my laptop open, multiple monitors, connected code spilling across every screen. My hair was tied back. The city lights flickered behind me. The hum of my air conditioner was the only sound. At 3:17 p.m., exactly 12 hours after the original masked attempt, another alert flashed. "Unauthorized probe detected. Signature identical to breach at 3:17 a.m. At first glance, it looked like the same attack. It wasn't. There were new layers, more complexity, a message woven into the static, not text, pattern. An old cipher I recognized instantly, Calder's cipher. He was a myth in cybersecurity circles, a ghost, a betrayal story whispered among veterans at industry conferences. Years ago, he'd been part of a dark research unit under Helix Global. He'd disappeared after compromising an internal prototype network, leaving behind only one message: "Truth deserves the one brave enough to handle it." Now he was in my network. Now he was watching me. Now he was following me. And he was testing whether I remembered the language he once taught me. My phone buzzed, breaking through the electric quiet. A message from an unknown Singapore number: "You've improved. Good. You'll need it." Another message came immediately after: "They don't know who you really are. But I do." I felt no fear. Just recognition. He wasn't threatening me. He was challenging me, as if I were the only opponent he deemed worthy. Far across the ocean in Portland, the unraveling continued. Ryan sat in his living room, unshaven, exhausted, listening to the HR director outline the consequences of his actions. "Your breach of client confidentiality, combined with attempts to access private accounts, creates substantial liability," she said. "Additionally, we've received inquiries about your relationship with Ms. Hart's sister. That relationship represents a conflict of interest." He rubbed his temples. "I wasn't Camilla left. That's why your marital issues are irrelevant. Your actions are not." Emily's fallout wasn't any better. Her supervisor gathered her team and announced that Emily was officially terminated, citing misconduct and violation of proprietary rights. Emily's voice cracked as she argued, "This isn't my fault. Ryan dragged me into this." Someone from the back of the room said, "No one dragged you anywhere, Emily. We saw you bragging about it on social media." Humiliation flushed through her spine like fire. For once, her charm had no effect. Her anger had no power. They both had built their lies on the assumption that I would stay silent. Now silence was the thing unraveling their lives. Back in Singapore, I locked my balcony door as twilight deepened. The city had softened into a warm glow, lights dotting the skyline, distant laughter drifting upward from the street. Then my phone vibrated again. A voicemail. From Rowan, my sister-in-law, one of the only decent people in Ryan's family. I pressed play. "Camilla, I'm so sorry." Her voice trembled. "Things are bad here, really bad. Ryan is telling people you abandoned him at the worst time of his life. Emily's telling people you're trying to ruin her. They're rewriting everything, twisting everything. I closed my eyes. Not surprised, not hurt, just tired. Rowan's voice softened. But people are starting to push back. They're telling the truth. They're exposing the lies. You're not there to defend yourself, but you don't have to be. The truth is louder than all of them now. Then her voice tightened, urgent. But, Camilla, there's something else. Someone asked about you this morning, someone I've never met. He knew your history. He knew your work. He knew things about you that no one should. A chill traced down my spine. Not fear, but recognition. Calder wasn't just following my digital footprint. He was crossing into my physical one. Rowan continued, "Be careful. I don't think he's connected to Ryan or Emily. I think he's connected to your past." She ended the message with a shaky breath. "Please, stay safe." I lowered the phone slowly. The city glowed behind me. My screens pulsed with encrypted warnings. Calder had breached my systems. He had followed my flights. He had traced my relocation. He had contacted people in my old life. But he hadn't tried to hurt me. He was pushing me into something. And I could feel the truth rising sharp and inevitable. This wasn't an attack. It was an invitation, a challenge, a door, and I was finally ready to step through it. Not as a wife, not as a sister, not as a woman running from betrayal, but as the person I had always been underneath the weight of everyone else's expectations, a strategist, a protector, a builder of truths, and someone no one should ever underestimate. "Calder," I whispered into the darkness, "if it's me you want, then come into the light." Because I wasn't hiding anymore. And I wasn't afraid of the next revelation. I was ready for it. When I stepped into the Helix Tower the next morning, the air felt electrically charged, as if the entire building knew something had shifted. The glass elevators hummed softly as they carried employees upward, their reflections fractured across mirrored walls. Every face looked intent, focused, unaware that someone outside the company, someone who knew my past, had already slipped into our digital perimeter. My badge pinged at the lobby gates. I walked through. I wasn't the same woman who arrived in Singapore days ago. The betrayal that once felt like a wound was now merely proof of who didn't deserve me. The chaos unfolding around Ryan and Emily no longer tugged at me emotionally. Their downfall belonged to them. Their lies had turned inward, consuming the very people who once felt comfortable dismissing me. But Calder, he was different. He wasn't interested in my emotions. He was interested in my mind. And that made him far more dangerous. The moment I reached my floor, Elaine intercepted me outside the conference room. Her expression was composed but tense. "We need to talk," she said. I followed her into her office, the floor-to-ceiling windows casting long shadows across her desk. She locked the door, an unusual gesture in a company that prided itself on transparency. She turned to face me. "Camilla, someone called the office this morning asking for you." I kept my breath controlled, who he wouldn't give a name. He said only that he needed to speak with you urgently. When our receptionist asked for context, he disconnected. But the number was international. Where from Portland? My pulse tightened, but not for the reason she assumed. That wasn't Ryan. He would have tried from his own phone. This was someone threading old geography into a new pattern. Before I could respond, Elaine added, "There's more." She handed me a tablet. An audio recording loaded. The voice that filled the room stopped my breath for a second, not out of fear but out of brutal familiarity. Ryan. He sounded exhausted, desperate, broken down into fragments of the man he pretended to be. "Please," he said into the recording, "I need to find her. I need to talk to her. She disappeared. My wife. She's ruining everything. I've lost my job. I've lost everything." Elaine watched me carefully. He called here at least 4 times using different departments. At one point, he tried to convince IT he was a vendor. I bowed my head briefly. "I'm sorry he involved the company. It's not your fault," she said. "But you need to know this level of persistence isn't normal. Normal." The word sat strangely on my tongue. Nothing about my life had been normal for months, not the secrecy, not the surveillance, not the betrayal, not the ghost following me across continents. But Elaine didn't stop there. He also said something else, she continued. Something unsettling. She pressed play on another clip. This time Ryan's voice cracked, not with anger, but fear. She's not picking up. I know she's there. Someone else is talking to her, I can feel it. Someone took her from me. Someone's getting in her head. Something cold slid down my spine. He wasn't afraid of losing me. He was afraid he no longer had access to me. Elaine watched my reaction. Camilla, you're safe here. But I need to know if there's anything you haven't told us. There were many things I hadn't told her. About the masked signals, about the 3:17 a.m. breaches, about Calder, about the messages only I knew how to decode. But I lifted my chin. Nothing that puts the company at risk. She searched my face, measured intentional, then nodded slowly. Your privacy is yours. But if anything escalates, you come straight to me. I will, I said. And I meant it. The rest of the morning moved in fragments. At my workstation, I pulled up system logs from the previous night. New anomaly detected. ZO 5:19 a.m. Device signature masked. Behavior pattern observational non-invasive. Region within 150 meters of your apartment. He was still close. Close enough to watch. Close enough to understand the rhythm of my days. I stared at the encrypted alert for a long moment, then opened a blank workspace in my system. If Calder wanted to watch me, I would watch him back. I wrote a silent tracker, lightweight invisible, embedded into the perimeter logs he had already breached. The moment he touched the network again, even with his masked signature, I'd see a flicker, a pulse, a fingerprint, the kind of print only someone who knew him, really knew him, would recognize. Around midday, my phone buzzed again. 2 messages. One from an unknown Singapore number. You're being followed by the wrong person. I'm the one trying to protect you. The second, meet me tonight. I'll tell you everything. No name, no signature. But I didn't need one. The style, the cadence, the precision, it was Calder. Across the ocean, Ryan was unraveling faster than anyone anticipated. He stood outside his mother's house, pounding on the door, shouting into the cold Oregon air. She won't answer me. She blocked me. Emily ruined everything. His mother opened the door only halfway. Ryan, stop. The neighbors can hear you. I don't care, he shouted. Everyone thinks I'm the villain. She made me the villain, no son, his mother said, her voice low. You did that yourself. Ryan stepped back as if struck. Then he collapsed onto the front steps, burying his face in his hands. Everything he thought he could control was slipping through his fingers like sand, and for the first time he saw himself clearly. He didn't miss me. He missed the woman who made excuses for him. He missed the version of himself he could only maintain as long as I was there, cushioning every bad choice he made. But I wasn't that woman anymore, and I wasn't coming back. That evening I walked through the Marina Bay district with my heart steady and my thoughts sharp. The city glowed in gold and sapphire reflections, footsteps echoing across the polished walkways. The air was warm, carrying the scent of seawater and jasmine. At the appointed location, a quiet overlook facing the water, I stopped. A man stepped from the shadows. Tall, lean. A face I had not seen in nearly a decade. Calder. His eyes scanned me with a familiarity that made the air shift. Camilla, he said softly. You finally answered. I didn't step back. Why are you here? I asked. He studied my face as if noting every change life had carved into me since the last time we'd crossed paths. Because someone else is coming for you. My chest tightened. Someone who isn't me, he added. I held my ground. Explain. He exhaled slow and measured. Your family's drama, that's noise. Your ex-husband and your sister. They're consequences, not threats. Then what am I dealing with? I asked. He stepped closer, the lamplight catching the edge of his profile, sharp, intentional, dangerous, in a way no betrayal from my past could ever match. "Someone inside Helix doesn't want you here," he said, "and they're willing to erase more than your career to make that happen." The breeze stilled around us. I whispered, "Why me?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because you're the only one smart enough to expose them." The truth hit like a shift in gravity. My past wasn't haunting me. My expertise was. My arrival in Singapore hadn't been a coincidence. It had been a trigger. Calder took another step close enough that I could feel the heat of his breath. "I can help you," he said quietly. "But you need to trust me." Trust. A fragile word. A dangerous one. But tonight, as the city shimmered below us and the shadows thickened around the truth, I understood something with absolute clarity. The betrayal I had left behind in Portland was nothing compared to the threat waiting for me here. And the next revelation would not come from my past. It would come from the very people who believed they had invited me into their world. I drew in a steady breath. Then I nodded once. "Tell me everything," I said. Because I was ready. More ready than anyone realized. Calder's presence felt like stepping into a room where the lights had been off for years, only to realize someone had been sitting quietly in the dark long before you arrived. His expression was unreadable, carved from something sharper than patience, something honed by years of moving through shadows I had once chosen to leave behind. "Start talking," I said, keeping my voice steady. He didn't waste a second. "There's a division inside Helix," he began, "one that operates under the guise of research, but it isn't monitored, not really. Not. They began recruiting high-level engineers 5 years ago, people who could build systems to bypass national firewalls, international protocols, anything that slowed them down." I crossed my arms. Illegal isn't even the right word," he said quietly. "It's bigger than that. They bypass governments, they bypass oversight. And when someone becomes inconvenient, someone like your predecessor, they disappear." I held his gaze. "The predecessor Elaine mentioned." He nodded once. "She said he left abruptly." "He didn't leave," Calder replied. "He was forced out. And they scrubbed the logs to make it look like he resigned. He didn't. He uncovered something he wasn't supposed to see, something connected to a global breach initiative disguised as research." My pulse deepened, slow and controlled. "And you think I'm next? Because I'm good enough to find it, too." "No," he said. "I know you're next." The wind brushed across us, warm and soft. The city glowed beneath our feet, unaware of the storm tightening above its skyline. I took a step closer. "Why warn me you don't do charity?" A faint smile touched his lips. "I'm not doing charity, I'm doing strategy. You're the only one who can stop them. And what do you get out of this?" He didn't deny the implication. "When you take them apart, I get to walk away clean. That's my interest. Honest, brutal, almost comforting in its lack of manipulation." "Tell me what they're after," I said. Calder's expression sharpened. "Access. Unlimited access. Helix built a prototype years ago, something capable of sweeping global data in real time. It wasn't supposed to launch. Too much power, too little transparency?" My heartbeat stilled. "Project Signet." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "So you've heard of it." "I audited part of its encryption model in the early drafts," I said. "The project was shelved. On paper," he replied. "But inside Helix, Asia, it's alive. And someone senior wants you to fortify the final weaknesses so they can launch it undetected." A cold certainty rippled down my spine, not fear, but recognition. Someone at Helix had already tried to access my personnel file, someone with admin privileges, someone who needed me. That meant someone inside the tower saw me not as a threat, but as a solution. "And they'll silence me," I whispered, "if I refuse." He nodded once. "Or if you uncover what they're really doing." I let silence stretch between us, not because I needed time to think, but because I needed time to feel the truth settle into place. I had left my home, my marriage, and my family's fractures behind. I had walked across an ocean to find a life that belonged to me. I had not expected to find a battlefield instead. Calder stepped closer, lowering his voice. I can walk you through their hidden entry points, but once you're inside, you're on your own. You expose them, or they expose you. The air seemed to shift thick with decision. What do you need? I asked. His answer was simple: access to your mind again. I almost laughed. You mean access to my skills set? He didn't smile. Same thing. We walked along the marina path in silence until I finally said what had been growing quietly inside me for months. I'm not the person I was when I knew you, I said. I know, he replied. I'm not impulsive. I'm not reckless. I don't leap into chaos anymore. He studied my face. You don't have to leap. You just have to step where they think you won't. I let out a slow breath. And what if I say no? Calder didn't blink. Then someone else dies. And eventually, so do you. He didn't mean physical death. People like Calder rarely spoke in literal terms. He meant erasure, silencing, being folded into a narrative manufactured by someone who controlled more than code. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent my whole life being underestimated, dismissed, minimized. And now, halfway across the world, I was being invited into a story where my mind was the threat and the weapon. That night I returned to my apartment and stared out at the harbor lights until the sky shifted from lavender to deep sapphire. The breeze carried traces of salt and jasmine, the city whispering its nighttime secrets. Then my phone buzzed. A voicemail. From Elaine. Her voice sounded tight, unfamiliar. Camilla. Call me when you get this. Something's happened. And I think it involves you. I replayed the message 3 times. Not panicked, not emotional, just processing. Then I opened my laptop and began tracing the signature of the masked intruder. Calder wasn't the only ghost. He wasn't even the worst one. Helix's internal logs revealed a new intrusion attempt, this one coming from inside the building through a chain of proxies woven through a sequence of systems only senior leadership could access. Someone above me wanted into my file. Someone above me wanted into my research. Someone above me was preparing a move. But unlike Ryan or Emily, they weren't sloppy. They were calculated, quiet, ruthless. And they knew how to mimic innocence. Before I could dig deeper, my phone lit again, this time with a text from Rowan. Ryan is spiraling. He's telling people someone else is manipulating you, someone from your past. My heart slowed, not with fear, but with an old familiar ache of recognition. Ryan needed an excuse for losing control. He needed a villain. He needed me small. And because I refused to be small anymore, he needed someone to blame. By the time midnight arrived, the evidence was clear. Calder was right. Someone at Helix was trying to resurrect Project Signet. Someone wanted me involved. Someone had deleted files that only I would notice missing. And someone had underestimated how quickly I could recognize the footprint of a lie. The next morning I stood at my window watching the sunrise cast gold across the harbor and realized something I had never allowed myself to believe out loud. I wasn't running away from anything anymore. I was running toward something. Toward truth. Toward power. Toward the version of myself I had muted for too long. I turned from the window, grabbed my bag, and headed for the door. Calder would wait for my answer. Helix would wait for my brilliance. And whoever was watching me from the shadows would soon discover something they hadn't accounted for. I wasn't afraid of being hunted. I was preparing to hunt back. Before I left, I recorded a voice note, not for Calder, not for Elaine, not for the unknown watcher, for myself. For the first time in my life, I whispered, I'm not shrinking. The city hummed outside my door. The truth pulsed in my hands. The story I thought had ended with betrayal was only beginning. And now to everyone listening, if you followed me this far, I hope you'll stay for what comes next. Tell me in the comments what moment hit you hardest, or what you think is waiting for me on the other side of this unraveling. Like, subscribe and stay with me because this story isn't over. Not by a long shot.